Show.
How you doing today, Ronnie?
Doing great, thank you.
Tell me how the tour's been so far.
Well, it's been long. It's been, this will be the ninth week, and ending the ninth week of the tour. So 2 months in a week is a long time to be on the road and not be home at all. But we've been really lucky because we've known each other for such a long time, all the guys in all the bands, and there's like a great big family out there. There's no, no egos busting about any place. And crowd-wise, it's been great. Audience has been wonderful. Weather's been particularly good, except for a few places where the humidity was like 98%. And of course, for a singer, that's just death, because it's like trying to breathe air, get a big breath in, and nothing comes in but water, you know. But it's been a great tour, and I think obviously a very successful one.
Now, how did this tour come about? How did you get the call to do it? Because this, I mean, you were part of the Purple family, like way back when.
I think, of course, because we have had such a long affiliation, Wendy and myself with all the Purple guys and Scorps, that, when our name was mentioned, it was, oh, wow, but it's mentioned usually through an agent. Oh, it'll be great. You think they'll do it? Well, we decided we have an album on it at this moment, so it made sense for us to be out there to promote that as well, and be part of what I said to you earlier before we started all this. It was a very classy tour.
Tell me how your youth shaped you musically. I
started playing at 5 years old. I was a trumpet player at 5 years old, and so that, I think, shaped me more than anything because it was a very classical education. I grew up playing, very classically oriented music. Played in orchestras most of the time as I was growing up in high school. Had a lot of opera around my house. That helped me a lot too. I mean, my hero was a guy named Mario Lanza, and I wanted to be like him. So when my opportunity came to be in a band or to create my own, I took that attitude, which was so natural for me to take, and put it inside of a rock context. And I think, I was one of the first who did that, if not the first who did that. And so it was that opera training, or not training, but that opera listening, and of course the classical training with the trumpet, that made the whole difference for me.
Now, how did ELF form, and what was your original vision for ELF?
Well, I think like any band should be, just a bunch of guys who grew up together, who loved rock and roll music, who wanted to play it. Luckily, or unluckily, I grew up in a time when, it was the early formations of a lot of that. So, there were no rules to follow. We had our heroes, of course, but they weren't the ones that everyone seems to have today. Everyone has a lot of heroes now. Of course, there's a greater volume of bands and musicians. But we were just a band that loved to play, couldn't wait to play for an audience, whether it was 8 people or 80 people, didn't matter to us. And that was the whole attitude of ELF. We were a honky-tonk rock and roll band. Came from a little town in upstate New York, which again shaped what we did, because there was a lot of, country music around where we came from too. A lot of R&B as well, that came from a university in our hometown. And we had a lot of people from New York City who would populate that university. So they brought their music with them, and a lot of it was R&B. So we grew up on a steady diet of that mainly, plus the country attitude, really again formed what we wanted to be. But we were just a band that just wanted to play.
Some of the highlights of that time with ELF.
Greatest highlight would be the first album that we did, which was produced by Roger Glover and Ian Pace, who are the drummer and bass player in Deep Purple. So again, the affiliation right away. They were our heroes. Deep Purple, one of them, still will always be one of my favorite bands. And so here we were with our heroes in front of us, and eyes wide open and mouths dropping down to the ground, and just getting a chance to know them and realize that that the people that you think are going to be unapproachable usually are just the nicest people on the face of the earth, and they always have been. And so that helped for us to, I think, get an attitude, knowing that maybe it's better to say please and thank you than it is to be an idiot sometimes, because they were so nice to us. So that was, I think, the most important thing that happened to us, that people that we respected that much, who had been so successful, liked what we did and wanted to help us along with our careers. And that just gave us the, I think, the drive to want to succeed the way they did.
How were you approached by Ritchie Blackmore to become a part of Rainbow?
Well, he had been in Purple at the time, and as ELF, we had done about 8 world tours with them as their opening act. And so Ritchie would go out every day and see us play, and he'd always listen to me, and I had no idea. I didn't talk to Ritchie for about a year and a half while we were on the road. He never said a word to me. And I realized that he was a pretty private guy, that because he was always had people leaping on his back because of his success and because of his extreme talent, that I probably would get along better with him if I just left him alone. So I did. And we, as I say, didn't speak for quite a while. And then one day he came into the dressing room, and I was there alone, just preparing to go out and see Purple play because I never missed the show. And he came into me and said, "You're a great singer," and walked out of the room. And I thought, well, that's really nice of you. And from that time on, he would call me and say, "I'm going to go out to a club, and we're going to have a jam. Would you like to come along?" And I'd say, "Sure, if you want me to." So I'd go, and we started jamming all the time. And whenever he went any place, he would call me, and we became very good friends. And then found out what our musical likes were, and they were the same. We both loved Bach. our first love, really, Bach. He respected me as a singer. I, of course, respected him immensely as a guitar player, but we had this wonderful rapport that we got musically together. So when the time came for him to say what he said to me, which was, I think Deep Purple were becoming too black-oriented for me. They were becoming a little bit too
funky.
R&B for
yeah,
him.
he said funky. He didn't like the funk.
Exactly. He said, you know, I want to put a band together. Would you do it with me? And I said, sure, on one condition. If you take my band, I will. So all the guys in Elf, except the guitar player, were in that first Rainbow band, because these are the guys I grew up with. These are the people I owed my allegiance to, and I believed in them and believed in ourselves, so I wasn't about to leave them high and dry just because some big star came to me and pulled me away from them. So they had the opportunity, and they did. They played on the first album.
And he agreed.
Absolutely. I must have been pretty important to him at that time, and that was a really wonderful thing for, you know, for me to realize that I was that important to him. So that's just the way it all started. He just didn't like what was happening with Purple and wanted to do something with someone who he knew had that classical attitude, which is what he always had, because we wanted to be a rock and roll band, a real heavy rock and roll band with a very orchestral classical attitude, which is what Rainbow started to be. Then, of course, it became something else after I left the band. I'm not saying it was, you know, just down to me that it was that, but you know, my vision of that band was what it was until I left. Yeah. And then it became something totally different to me. It became a pop band.
All the musicians that were in the band were competent, but it seemed like there was this revolving door. Why?
Well, I mean, I think that's something really you'd have to ask Richie about. I mean, in the case of Jimmy, I mean, I can tell you in the case of some people that Richie has always called himself a musical vampire. He said, you know, as soon as I suck all the blood out of that person, it's time for them to go, and I'll get somebody else to suck the blood up, and, you know, and talent blood, I guess. And he's the one who said it, not me. And he did that a lot. In the case of the first band, the Elf band, he was absolutely right. They weren't good enough to be in the kind of band that he wanted, and he was right. They played wonderfully on the album, but he didn't feel that it was going to happen in a live situation. So we started to replace people.
Did they feel like they couldn't be in the band anymore, and they would bow out,
No.
or did Richie just go, you're fired?
No, it was Richie who, you know, he would talk to me and say, you know, he knew how close we were. And I also knew that I had given them an opportunity. If you can survive, then you survive. To say, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to leave if you leave. No, it wasn't that way. If they weren't adequate, and this was adequate in Richie's eyes, then they weren't adequate. And I happened to be the only one who, I guess, was adequate in his eyes. Then I became the, you know, the next one to go after, you know, some other people had been in and out, because he wanted them to have a pop band, and, you know, more of a pop band, more of a, you know, doing other people's material, which he did, and it's not what I ever did, and I never wanted to do that, and I wouldn't do that, and I don't write love songs, so I said, no, I won't do this, and so that was bye-bye time, and it was okay. It was okay. I had a good run in the band.
Those albums are just staples.
Well, that's the band that everybody wants to see back together again. They certainly want to see Richie and I back together again. You know, maybe there are some who say, well, why don't you play with Joel and Turner again? Well, maybe that may happen. I mean, that may be, some may ask that, but that's not the important band to people. The important band was the one that started it all, and that was mainly myself, Richie, and then Cozy, who came in at the end, but became such an important part of it. So I know how important that band was. After all these years, the first show we did in Montreal, we drew 1,500 people. Well, the place held 17,000. And it was pretty traumatic for Richie. You know, whoa, we're going from filling the place to suddenly playing for that many people. Well, all these years later, I've talked to at least 50,000 people who were at that show. So that shows you how important it was to most people. You know, it's like everybody saw Babe Ruth hit his 60th home run, you know, and in reality, not that many people did see it. So it's that same kind of thing. People want that era to happen again. We'll just hold it in their hearts and make themselves believe that it was huge then, and it wasn't. We had to work for it.
Would you have changed anything?
Not one thing would I change in my life. I see no reason for changing the things that are meant to be. I'm pretty much of a fatalist. I think those things are meant to be. My philosophy in life is you take steps forward, you don't take steps backward. That's all. It's so easy. You know, why look at what you've done? It's what you do today that you have. That's when you have to prove yourself. You don't live on your laurels, and that's been good for me because it's always made me work harder, and also made all the people I played with work harder too. Because if they have that attitude that I pervade, I insist upon that from everyone. And I'm not one who likes to change. I don't like change a lot. Sure, we've had changes inside of our bands too, you know, and it has to happen. There are times when people fall by the wayside and they're not good enough to do it, or for a personal reason perhaps. And so maybe that answers some of the reasons why Richie changed people a lot. Well, we didn't change that many, and we've in fact have been ones who have brought the old people back in again after they've maybe gone astray. But for me, it's always been, again, steps forward, and we're a big family. We're a giant family. Our family is not just a band, our family is our road crew, because you're only as good as your road crew. If your road crew aren't good, then you're doomed. Absolutely. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to suck out there. You are.
The Blairing Out Show.